So yesterday, I played in a local Riftbound Summoner Skirmish, and I ended up winning the entire event using my Victor deck. So in this video, I'm going to break down the tournament, the matches I played, and why this deck performed so well.
So the event had 9 players total. We played 4 rounds of Swiss, and then the top 4 players advanced to elimination rounds. I ended up making top 4 and eventually winning the whole event with Victor. My first match of the tournament was against Lucian, and honestly, this matchup felt pretty good for the Victor deck. The main reason is that my deck, being yellow, runs a ton of removal spells, which makes it very easy to deal with Lucian himself. Since Lucian is such an important part of their strategy, if you consistently remove him, it pretty much just kills the whole deck. In the first game, I was able to keep the board under control by using my kill spells to remove Lucian, though he kept trying to set up the Trinity Force Skyfall combo, making Lucian able to take tons of points in almost one move. So after game 1, I decided to sideboard in 2 salvages, specifically to deal with that combo. Salvage gives me the answer to Trinity Force before the combo gets really strong, which makes the matchup much safer. Once I had that extra answer in the deck, it became a lot easier to control the game and eventually close it out with Victor. Match number 2. My second match was against Azir, and this was another 2-0 win. This is actually my friend playing this deck. Azir decks usually try to overwhelm the board with units, but the control tools in the Victor deck can handle that pretty well. It ends up becoming pretty awkward to use removals like Call of the Week because Azir ends up using very low-cost units, but with combos like Bellows Breath and Imperial Decree, it's able to stabilize and take over board control. I ended up clutching up the second game by taking over one battlefield with 6 points, going to 7, and then using a Time Warp for the win. My third round was against Jinx Miracle, and this was definitely one of the tougher matchups of the tournament. The reason this deck is so scary is because it can generate these really explosive turns where they suddenly flood the board with units. The combo they're trying to assemble usually involves cards like Battering Ram, Rasa the Sunderer, Stacked Deck, and Called Shot. Once those pieces start coming together, the deck can suddenly generate a huge amount of pressure out of nowhere. A big part of this strategy revolves around Stacked Deck, which helps them cycle through their cards and keep the engine running, along with Purple Ezreal. Then cards like Called Shot and other draw effects keep them to find the pieces that they need. Once they get their setup going, they can chain together a bunch of plays in one turn, sometimes dropping multiple units and threats back to back. Once Purple Ezreal gets involved, things can get really dangerous because the deck suddenly gains a lot of extra value and damage potential. So the matchup really comes down to surviving those explosive turns and trying to disrupt their startup before the combo even gets out of control. In my match, I was able to slow things down by controlling the board with those yellow kill spells and forcing them to commit resources early. Once the game went on longer, Victor just is able to take over, start generating more and more value, and eventually take control of the game. My fourth round was against Master Yi, and this match ended up going to game 3. In game 1, things actually went really well for me. My opponent didn't draw many cheap early units, which meant I was able to start developing the board pretty quickly. Once I had a few units down, I could start putting pressure on the battlefield, and whatever my opponent played, even if it was something really big, I was just able to kill it with a kill spell and keep control of the board. That let me slowly build up enough pressure to close out the first game. But game 2 was a lot tougher. This time, my opponent had a bunch of cheap units early, and that's where the Master Yi Legend ability becomes really annoying to deal with. A lot of those units get +2 while defending battlefields, which makes them surprisingly hard to remove efficiently for Victor. Because of that, they were able to defend these battlefields really well and slow the game down. I wasn't able to break through the defenses, and eventually they were able to stabilize and take the second game. So it all came down to game 3. In that final game, the draws really lined up for me. I was able to control the board early and keep their threats in check. Once the game went longer, though, the Victor deck started to do what it does best, generating value and taking control of the board. Eventually, the game went into really late game to where I was able to finish up the game with a Time Warp clutch, which secured the match. Once we moved into the top 4 elimination rounds, I actually had to play against Lucian again. This time, the match was a lot harder than the first time we played. In game 1, my opponent was able to start setting up their combos pretty quickly. Lucian decks can snowball really fast once they start to get their pieces online, and there were a few moments where it honestly looked like I might lose the whole game. They kept getting their combo pieces and applying pressure to the battlefield, which made it difficult to stabilize early. But the Victor deck has one big advantage in this matchup: a lot of kill spells. Every time Lucian hit the board, I was able to remove him before the combo could really even take over. By consistently answering their key threats and slowing the game down, I eventually stabilized the board. I ended up losing game 2 because he was able to get his combo and I wasn't able to quite stop it as fast. Once the game went a little bit longer, I was able to start generating value with Victor, the momentum shifted to my favor, and I managed to close out the game. So in the finals, I ended up facing Jinx Miracle again, which was definitely one of the scariest decks in the tournament. In game 1, my opponent actually wasn't able to find all the pieces they needed for their big Miracle push. That deck usually tries to set up a huge explosive turn where they flood the board with threats all at once. But in the first game, they just couldn't get everything together fast enough. Because of that, I was able to control the board and eventually close out the game with Victor keep generating value over time. But game 2 was a completely different story. This time, my opponent actually managed to assemble the full Miracle push. They were able to chain together their combo pieces, and suddenly, there was a ton of units hitting the board all at once. At that point, it looked really dangerous, because if that board sticks around for even one turn, the game could basically end right there. But this is when one of the strongest combos in the game comes into play: Bellows Breath, Imperial Decree. This combo gives you an entire board wipe essentially. By using Imperial Decree, all of the units who are damaged that turn will die. Bellows Breath repeated lets you do damage to up to 6 units basically at different battlefields. So when my opponent went for their big Miracle push, I was able to respond with that board wipe combo and completely clear their board. Once the board was reset, the momentum shifted back in my favor, and I was able to close out the match and win the entire tournament. So yeah, that was my run through the Summoner Skirmish tournament, and I ended up taking the whole thing with the Victor deck. The deck honestly felt really strong throughout the entire event. As long as you can survive the early game and manage the board carefully, Victor and the value generation completely take over matches. I also got some pretty cool prizes from the event, so I'll show those here. If you're thinking about trying Victor Control, this deck definitely proved itself in this tournament. And if you enjoyed the video and want more Riftbound content like deck guides, tournament breakdowns, and meta discussions, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.